Hello, wild ones. We're talking split stitch. So we're going to talk first about embroidery floss. You want to make sure when you're doing split stitch, it is using these embroidery floss that's 6 pieces versus this circular floss, which is already bound together. Very hard to split stitch. So we're not using this thread. We're only going to use threads like this. Pretty easy to see, much looser, and not, you see the difference between the woven, where it's bumpy like that, and the non-woven. So we're going to take off a length of it. I kind of think about the length of my arm as long enough. For me, I'd rather do more knots and less length because you're going to have less tangles, less everything. And to split our thread, I might lick my fingers and just get in there and get it so I can at least see the threads. And instead of doing a 3-3 split, because we're doing split stitch, I'm actually going to do 4 and 2. So I'm going to look at my threads. There's 4 on this side and there's 2 on this side. And then as I pull out, I really want my end of my thread to be suspended in air, preferably, or at least very loose pull. When I pull really fast, it kind of binds up on itself like that, and it can really cause havoc. And then when I'm done pulling, I hold up both strands and let them unspin because there's some spin added when you're splitting them apart. I'm not going to use the 2 strands. I'm going to demonstrate with 4 strands so you can really see. So the 2 strands gets just wound back up on our clothespin. And you can just put that back through the pincher too, so you know you have a little bit more 2-strand thread at the end. So let's make a knot at one end, and I'm just going to run it around 2 fingers, push the tail through. 1 knot should be sufficient for 4 strands, and it shouldn't pull through the project. So I'm just tightening that up, and I'm going to the other end to put my needle through. I don't tend to use too much. I don't put it in my mouth anymore. Mainly, I'll just lick my fingers and then just flatten it out like that. Try to get the ends as aligned as possible and flattened out. And then I'm just going to kind of work my needle over the top. And sometimes it works perfect. That was a pretty good one. And then I'm pulling my tail nice and long. New sewists often just give themselves a tiny bit of a tail. I don't need to pull all that length through, so it being doubled over, just having a little bit of working end, you just have to remind that you don't not notice that your tail is in. Okay, let's work on this piece for a split stitch. So I'm going to start by burying that little knot I made. So I'm going through the backer fabric, the centered fabric, the sandwich, the meat, and then the top bread. Now for a split stitch, I'm going to put in either 1 back stitch or 1 running stitch to start. I'm going to go down, pull it through, and a little weird extra bit of thread come out. So now I've turned my project around. I did end up doing a back stitch just so it wouldn't pull tight against the knot. Now I'm coming out at the end of my next stitch. And now to split it, I'm going to go in and kind of just pierce in between it. I'm hoping that I'm getting 2 strands on one side and 2 strands on the other. As you work your project, you'll start noticing the feel of it when it is aligned like that. So I'm splitting the stitch. This is on a fleece center, and I'm not a big fan of stitching through fleece. I think that's the last time I'm going to use fleece as a centerpiece or a center layer. So I'm just pushing it through the split, and you can kind of like see how you're doing on either side. If you want to make your split stitches a little bit longer, this is a pretty tight stitch. I really like the look of it. This is how it looks on the back. It's very similar to stem stitch, where you're going to go through a lot of thread when you're using this. But if you want to do a bigger stitch, like I'm going to leave that about twice the size of the last stitch. With a split stitch, you can do it. Now, I'm at the point where my tail is stuck in the fabric, and it looks like it just kind of knotted funnily at the end. So now I'm gonna pull on my pull my needle away from the project while the end moves. So I'm just repositioning my needle. Now I'm gonna go back in for a longer split stitch. And I kind of don't aim for the center of this the stitch in front of it. I aim kind of at the very, maybe a little tiny ways up from the tail of the stitch. So see how you can really see that there's 2 on one side and 2 on the other. You can get away with longer stitches with a split stitch because they're never going to ease apart because of how you're building the stitch. You're literally like braiding them together in a way. So that is the split stitch. Very similar to a back stitch or a stem stitch, but it is split and you get a little bit different look. It ends up being a really pretty stitch. Happy stitching!